Hello students, this is Dr. Winkler again, bringing you another World War I lecture. This is the 20th lecture for the World War I class. And we're getting deep into some of the more horrific elements of the war. In other words, we're starting to talk about some of the most horrific battles in human history. If you were taking a World War II class from me, and I've taught it a number of times, I would probably tell you that the Battle of Stalingrad is perhaps the greatest battle of the Second World War, perhaps the greatest battle of all time. In terms of numbers of Germans and Russians involved, the number of casualties involved, it's absolutely huge. However, can we make a statement that the Battle of Verdun during the First World War might be in that category? The numbers of casualties are not as high at Verdun as we're seeing later in 1942 and 1943 at the Battle of Stalingrad. But once again, the intensity of combat, the number of shells that were fired, the number of men were killed in a very small area, does tell us that Verdun is extremely great battle, maybe the most intense of all time. Well, we were talking about some of the fighting last time. Remember, I talked about the fall of Fort Douaumont, where the Germans, with ridiculous ease, took this in the first 2 days of the battle, which they hold on to until the fall. Becomes a scene of intense combat. The Germans are trying to hold it, trying to push beyond it, actually. The French are trying to retake it. And I showed you last time some photographs of the aerial bombardment of Fort Douaumont. I should say not aerial bombardment, bombardment of the ground, taken from an aerial photograph. Remember, I made the comparison here. You notice right here we have a photograph of the fortress before the battle and a photograph of the fortress after the bombardment. So once again, this is horrific by any standard. Well, I talked about the flow of the battle. They're pounding in on the hills, pounding in on the ridge line where Fort Douaumont is located. But the Germans made a very, very bad mistake early in the battle because they only attacked on the east bank of the Meuse, which led to a very big problem when we have artillery that can hit, oh, well, that's great, that can hit the well, here we go again, that we can hit the Germans in the flank. I think I use this map or one of these, probably not that one because it's not big enough. A little bit better, give you an idea. Remember, we have these battles for these hills going on weeks and months, where the French and the Germans are trying to control the height that overlook the river and, at least initially, protect the French artillery when they're firing into the flank of the Germans. Remember, these are Les Morts Hommes, de Toteman, which means the dead man, very well named hill. Last time I was talking about the siege of Fort Vaux. Can we get over here? Probably won't help, I'll try it anyway. Does not help. Fort Vaux is right over here. So the Germans are hitting here and here at the same time. The Germans think this is a pretty good idea for one major reason. If the French have to defend here, and if they have to defend here at the same time, isn't there a pretty good chance that your forces will be, shall we say, dissipated, be extended out a ways, so you can't concentrate in one area? There might be something to that, but the reverse is true as well. If the Germans are hitting here and here at the same time, then they're dispersing their men as well. Sacred Way, one of the last things I was discussing. the road to supply the army, and I gave you some photographs of what the road looked like. Remember, I said it was necessary to keep this road going at all times. The French actually even deployed a division that could have been used in combat up at the front to maintain the road at all times, to make sure that there's not that a bump in the road doesn't end up being a rut, and a rut ends up slowing down the columns. That's what I wanted to show you last time, because there is a monument along the road, along the Sacred Way. We have a map of it right here. Since we have Verdun, it went down in this direction, where you connect up with the rail lines right here. So this is the road, and there's a monument which I have seen to show you commemorating what the French were able to accomplish. Now, I would say this is relatively small potatoes compared to the actual fighting itself, but it does show to which extent the French were willing to make every possible effort to keep the battle going. How ferocious was actually the fighting? There is a kind of a curious thing here. There was a trench. Men were deployed there. It's not too far from Fort Dunmont. Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. You drive over, get out of your car, walk in. The French have turned this into not only is a sacred way, it's a sacred monument. I'll give you an exterior view if I could. You walk inside here, you go inside, and encased in very high quality concrete is the location. There was about 20 men here. How do we know this happened? The men were standing here. Some of the old photographs even still show this. The men were standing in the trench with their rifles at the ready. In other words, the rifles were poking above the ground. In the intensity of bombardment, you can imagine shells coming in, dirt, dust, rocks being thrown up in the air. Enough came down, apparently, to bury these men alive at the ready with their bayonets sticking up. As we look at some of these, can I give you a closer photograph? At some of these crosses, it's an older photograph, as you can see. It actually says French soldier, unknown, so they don't know the names of these men. Is there more than one explanation as to what could have happened here? I am not sure. Is it possible these men were actually standing here? They had no alternative. They couldn't get up. They couldn't move. They couldn't push the dirt back fast enough before they're literally buried alive. I guess that's possible. What I would guess is this, that if there's any place anywhere on the Western Front with a terrific bombardment, both French and German going on down at Verdun, that this was possible anywhere, it would have been possible here. Can you ask yourself, do I believe this? I really have no other explanation. What else could have happened here? But the intensity, of course, would have to have been enormous. Well, let's go back and talk a little bit more about the flow of the battle. You notice we have the initial attacks. The Germans are largely successful the first few days, pushing, what's that, a mile or two, coming down in this direction. Of course, the intensity of combat over here and all along this front, particularly around Fort Vaux, puts this the heart of the battle. Notice there's a small amount here. Is that a half mile? Something like that. The Germans didn't give up on this until after June 1916. Remember, they start in February and the battle goes from the German side, from the German attacking standpoint, until June. What the Germans had done is they've gotten a hold of a French gas mask. Pretty easy to get, capture somebody. They have a gas mask. Of course, they sent it back to their chemists in Germany, and they played with it and thought they saw a flaw in it. If you actually had a certain kind of phosgene, you take the phosgene gas, you alter the chemical compound somewhat, the chemists believe it would actually get within the mask. So this is a big potential advantage, at least according to Germans. You could put these in shells. You could shell the French positions. Of course, the French would pull out their gas mask. And in pulling out their gas mask, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to get into them anyway. And of course, that can make a big deal of difference. And this might be the means by which you can actually win the battle. Now, in theory and on paper, that works pretty good. But in reality, it doesn't work very good at all. See, the French are obviously examining their own equipment. And they're continually examining them and upgrading them throughout the course of the war. So they look at their own gas mask and say, you know, maybe we could do a little better. Maybe there's a flaw here, potential flaw. They don't know about this other kind of phosgene that the Germans are developing. But let's make sure our masks are as good as possible. Very fortunately, probably for the French, they issued new gas masks to these people before the Germans hit with the massive gas attack. So the gas masks actually did function the way they were designed to. The Germans come out, however, they think they've got an advantage. They seem to initially. They punch, they push another section over here. And that's as far as they reach in the entire battle. Could they have taken Verdun, the city itself? We're not sure. But that's as far as they got. All of that for a few square miles. What's a little bit difficult to see on this map, I know, because the resolution is not as big as I would like it to be. But see if I can show you some villages near Verdun. There are, what was it, 15 villages that were in the battlefield area. And we have a photograph of some gentlemen standing right here where we believe there might have been some ruins. What's misleading about this is that as you look around at some of these villages, and there seems like there's something left. In reality, the villages I have visited, there's nothing left. I mean, usually when you see a photograph of a village or town in the First World War, you see ruins, you see smashed buildings, you see rubble. You go to these villages, you don't see rubble. I'm not exaggerating. You literally do not see one stone on top of each other. One of these villages I walked over to, they had signs. The French had placed signs where this had been a blacksmith shop. This had been a carpenter shop. There's nothing there at all. There's not a stone, there's not a stick. There's a sign saying, well, we know that it was there. Utter and complete obliteration. Some of these villages had several hundred inhabitants. To be absolutely, completely obliterated by the artillery. Now, I'm very happy to say that there was virtually nobody in the villages when this happened. You just drive around here and you discover these. I don't see it on the map. There was another village over here, which was closer to Côte 304 and Le Morton, the dead man, and it's also obliterated. So they were always just obliterated here, or obliterated here. They weren't just obliterated there; they're obliterated here as well. I've said that wrong. Now, the French, of course, in commemoration of these villages, they have not been rebuilt. Obviously, not been re-inhabited. The French actually still say that they're still part of the nation of France. So there's still some people that are supposed to represent them. Obviously, that's very, very nice. But after all of this, there is virtually nothing left. Now, Philippe Pétain, we met him up here. Remember, he's very important in the First World War, and he's very, maybe more important in the Second World War because he leads France under the infamous Vichy regime from 1940 to 44. But this man, you see, not a young man. In reality, he's suffering from some mental problems. We can actually make an argument. As clever as he was, as good as he was, he held defensive positions. He inspired the men. He made sure the sacred way was operating. He rotated men in and out of there. Rather than leaving men there for months on end, he'd rotate them out in a few weeks. This is all very, very good. I'll talk more about that in 1 minute. But he's suffering from some kind of mental disorder. Is it too wild to say, even though he's not under fire, that the intensity of what he's doing leaves him with a form of shell shock? Now, he's going to recover. They're going to, but at least for the time being, he's just under too much pressure. And they decide, well, maybe we needed somebody else in there to kind of organize what's going on. It's not like the French government was unhappy with him, but he's probably not in a position to continue. So we bring in Robert Nivelle. This is essentially the first time we're going to talk about Nivelle. Very unfortunately and very disastrously, we'll be talking about him later in other contexts. Robert Nivelle thinks he's got a way of solving all of this. What he does is this. Whenever you're going to have an attack, you bombard your enemy. When the French are going to attack, the Germans have a pretty good idea this is going to happen because the artillery comes over, basts their positions, and then a few seconds, few minutes, the firing stops. So the German guns want to be deployed. Now, what the Germans had done, this is commonly done by all sides during the war, is that you have some kind of camouflage. Sometimes there's a pattern on it. Can I show you World War I camouflage here? By World War II standards, it's a little bit crude, but it works. If you're in an aircraft, and you don't want to get too low, do you? you don't want to get too low, because there's a good chance they could shoot at you. You're up a few thousand feet usually. You can take photographs, you can look down, but what you're seeing is just terrain features. The camouflage, you can see by World War II standards, that looks kind of crude. What they were doing on ships in this case is they just tried to make it different from the normal silhouette that the German submarines were normally seeing. Was it effective? It was better than nothing. Well, that's not exactly what I like to show you. Anyway, it's this canvas, and they put patterns on the canvas, something similar to you might put on a German helmet. Some patterns on there, so it doesn't stick out, and so men flying over go on. So it's hard for them to designate where the German batteries are. However, when the French start shelling, boom, 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 when the French start shelling and act like they're going to attack, then the camouflage has to come off. Notice you have to throw back the canvas, throw it back to expose your guns so you can start firing at the French attacking. At that moment, over the area of Verdun. You look down, the pilots look down, they have cameras, they look down and they can see where the gun batteries have been exposed. Time is very important on this because the Germans, of course, can move their batteries. You take a photograph, you fly it back over French lines. If you come down and you land and you get off and they run it into a place where you develop the film, that can take time. So what you do is fly back to the field and drop it, parachute. The camera down there, the camera would come down here. That way you don't have to land. This speeds up the process. You take it and develop it, and you can have, not in real time, but pretty fast, you can have information literally on the desk of the generals before the Germans can really do much of anything about that. Now, remember, something I should say, in reading about the Battle of Verdun, the pilots that were flying over them, some of these were American pilots in the Lafayette Escadrille, these men that had actually volunteered for aerial combat in the French army. We'll mention them again later. Even up at thousands of feet above the battle, because the shelling was so intense, these men would get jerked around by the compressed air going up thousands of feet. Give you another indication as to the intensity of the bombardment and how severe it was with all the explosions. Let's go back to the actual battle on the ground. Can we say Nivelle's idea was to bait the German guns into showing themselves, even though there was no French attack? Now, not in real time, but very close to real time. Get the photographs back, drop them on his office, and he says, okay, now we know where the batteries are. So we have counter battery fire. The French, therefore, will use their batteries now. They'll get the canvas off and everything, and they'll start firing, and they'll go over and hit the German guns. Remember, during the First World War, when we were discussing gas, counter battery fire could often be explosives. Well, one of the more effective ways of not knocking out the guns, but shall we say destabilizing the crew so they can't operate as rapidly or as efficiently, was to use gas shells. So Nivelle used explosive devices, he uses gas shells. And the German batteries become, I shouldn't say ineffective, they still function somewhat. Some of them still fire. But the real bombardment that they have been capable of throwing out of a French attack now has been knocked down. Using this as an advantage, and it is a real advantage, Nivelle goes on the offensive. And he's able to retake, I believe it's October 1916, both Fort Douaumont and Fort Vaux. If you look at this on the ground, this looks very, very impressive. This man's new ideas, great ideas, comes up with a good idea. Well, that's right. Something else we can do. So what's challenging about this map is it really doesn't talk about, doesn't really show, I should say, what Nivelle was able to do with these counterattacks. However, it's some, oh, it is there. I couldn't see it. It simply goes up here. Doesn't retake all this ground. Certainly doesn't retake Côte 304 and Le Mouton. But he actually, and this, I've been there, of course, this is a ridgeline right here. So he actually pushes back up and takes this area. Now, once again, on paper, you look at this and, wow, this guy's good. He has some good ideas. Well, let's look at it again. The Germans are no longer attacking here. Yeah, they're not even actually willing to hold on this anymore. They're not going to renew the attacks. The strategic advantage has been lost. The Germans have a big, big problem elsewhere on the Western Front. That's the Battle of the Somme, which starts in July 1916. So they don't have an awful lot of manpower to stick down here. In reality, it appears that Nivelle has retaken Douaumont and Vaux. In reality, the Germans had already abandoned them. It wasn't worth it to keep on fighting here. Can we say Nivelle's ideas worked. Once again, they appear to work. In reality, I could take a position with a lot less skill, the very minimal skill that I have, if any at all, if it's abandoned. But the thing I should remember, of course, this is a great French morale booster. I'm not denying that at all. But I am going to say that this rockets Nivelle's prestige. And within a matter of months, he's going to be leading the entire French army. And he thinks he has ideas that'll work. In reality, his ideas are disasters. They do not work. We'll talk about that when we get to 1917. Let me go back to Pétain's ideas. Rather than leaving your men in the trenches for weeks and months, as the Germans are doing, same units go up, you leave them there. Yeah, the casualties are heavy. You bring in reinforcements to re-strengthen your units, but they leave these men up there. I've already talked about the kind of problems you can have, which are almost inevitable that you're going to have if you're up at the front for weeks and months. That's going to do you severe damage. See, the Germans are stupid in this regard. You leave these men up here, and even if they can figure out how to survive, of course, many of them do not survive. Even if you can figure out how to survive, and they would sit in your shell hole, as long as you can, and take all the precautions you possibly can to survive, you're going to pay an enormous price for this. But then the French, going back to Pétain. Pétain realizes psychological problems. Remember, this is a guy who's developing a psychological problem. And he realizes he has the advantage of the sacred way. He's able to move troops in and out. So he takes units, large units, sometimes entire divisions, and he'll place them up at Verdun for a number of weeks, usually 2. He said that's literally as long as these guys can really be there and continue to function before they have numerous problems, before the casualty rates get so high. So there's, depending which book you want to read. One book says there's 102 French divisions at that time. Another book says like 110 divisions. I'm not going to quibble over the numbers, but can we say that roughly 3/4 of the French army have the experience of having fought at Verdun? The rotation system of the French is actually a pretty good idea. It's designed to keep the men at high battle efficiency for as long as possible. Remember, the Germans don't pick up on this. Let's get the Western Front. Oh boy. You think I would learn? I don't. There's one we've been using fairly well, or fairly frequently. Notice the Battle of Verdun right here. A lot of the intensity combat of the war takes place up here. Aside from the first weeks of the war, there's not much combat in the central area. In fact, we get down here, unfortunately this map doesn't take us all the way to the Swiss border. But this area down here is a quiet sector. Remember when I was talking about the live and let live system, where there are times that the trench is so close together, you can shout back and forth fairly easily. You can throw newspapers 20, 30 meters across over there, guy with a good arm. They throw newspapers back and forth. Guys sit in their trenches, smoking their pipe or cigarette, whatever they're using, reading newspapers within just meters, a few hundred meters of the Germans. You see, Pétain realizes this. You take these units, they get bloodied. They suffer casualties. The men are having problems. Then you rotate the army. And if they're battered badly enough, well, you take them out. And you stick them out here for a number of weeks, quiet sector. Yeah, you're technically defending an area, though you're not fighting. You're down here, quiet sector. Give the men a few weeks. Get more sleep, get better food, get themselves psychologically ready before you rotate them up again. It's a very good idea to keep your strength up. But in doing that, you have like 3/4 of the French army are going to have the experience of having been deployed and fighting at Verdun. I don't think I have the casualty figures here. It's a little difficult because it depends on which book you want to read. Winston Churchill, very able historian, wrote multi-voluminous histories of the First World War and of the Second World War. I'm going to say that a lot of this is autobiographical. A lot of this is to make him look good. But a lot of this is involved heavy research. He didn't do the research. He paid people to do the research. They brought in the research and sometimes he tells it pretty straight. Sometimes you can shall we say, emphasize things a little bit differently. Maybe little distortions might be involved. Very good books worth reading. On the other hand, his casualty estimates on both sides, the French and Germans at the Battle of Verdun, would lead us to indicate like 1,200,000 casualties. And other books will have different casualty figures. What I've seen over time is that the estimates tend to go a little bit lower. What I'm seeing most recently now in the most recent books is that we say that the French, in killed and wounded, it's total casualties, at Verdun lost something like 380,000 men. The Germans, very similar casualty figures, but not quite as high, like 350,000 men. So you add these together and you have well over 700,000 men. Of those, on both sides, 200, 300,000 dead. For an area that's inconsequential, it's very small. I've been to Verdun twice. First time was in 1982. I said that, 1983. The one and only time I've ever been to Paris. Oh, that was interesting. Paris is to die for. I got to go back sometime, but I haven't been able to manage them. I forget, we had like 9 days in Paris. So our tour, we're teaching on study abroad, so I'm kind of taking care of students. So I just can't gallivant over and do anything I want to do. One of the highest desires I had in Paris was to see the Louvre. I adore art. I'm not an art historian, but I really enjoy art. The Louvre is considered to be perhaps the premier art museum in the Western world, maybe in the world entirely. I had a day to go there. We're standing this long line to get in the Louvre. The line's not moving. I look up front and people are starting to walk away. Well, why would you walk away from one of these most brilliant experiences? Finally, I learned after a while that the security people, the guards at the museum, had some issue. I think it's like one day strike where they want some more compensation one way or another. So we can't go there. I have another day. I can go to the Louvre or I can go to Verdun. That is my choice. I chose to go to Verdun. Got on a train. It's nice to have a Euro pass. The train was free. Got on a train going over here. As I was not quite prepared as I thought I was. Because of course I knew, particularly in 1918, when the Germans attacked in these areas, that the rail line would probably follow a direct line more or less. And there's going to be areas here that had been fought over in 1918. I look out the window. I remember going past the city of Château-Thierry. Of course, immediately I'm going, Well, that's one of the first places that an American division was deployed in 1918, where Americans got bloodied. You look out the window and see the town, didn't get off the train. You start seeing the graveyards. I'm looking over, this has to be World War I graveyards. Large numbers of stones, headstones going down. I got to Verdun, it's off season. They often would have buses going from Verdun itself up to the battlefield. Well, it's too far to walk. I hired a cab. Interesting experience. I don't speak French. He doesn't speak English or German. So we try to communicate with my few phrases. Actually, I think it worked fairly well. I knew enough that I could at least tell him what I wanted to go and what I wanted to see. I didn't have a lot of time. He drove me around. I got off. I walked around. I got at Vaux. I saw the trench of bayonets. I got to Dumo and some other places. He let me off to see where villages had once existed that no longer existed. Now, was it 2014 or something, a few years ago, I got back and did it again. This time I'm in my own car. But let me tell you what happened when I was there my first visit. There is a place in Verdun, it's called the ossuary. It's an enormous concrete structure. Not the first time, but the second time I went there, I walked up in the tower. So I got a nice view out of the window. They showed us a film. It was in French. I can follow more or less what they were trying to tell us. This is the second visit. I'm looking around. They showed some very disturbing film I've never seen anyplace else. Like after the war, when they were pulling the bodies off the battlefield. Right next to the ossuary, there's this enormous graveyard. Second time I was there, you walk around these things. Oh my goodness. And you walk and you walk. Tens of thousands of graves. I have read that in this one area alone, including what's in the ossuary, at least well over 100,000 men. Now, this is somewhat misleading because remember, Verdun's down here. The battle is a battlefield. Can I get back to our map here? Verdun's down here. The battlefield's up here. That's a relatively high area. So when you go up there, you're driving up the hill. All over here. It's down by Verdun, all in this area. You go out in the fields over here and over here. There's graveyards upon graveyards upon graveyards. Now remember, this is the French side of the trenches. You have men that are not buried at all. You have men that are buried up here near the battlefield. And you have, what I think had happened, is that many of the men that were killed fighting here and here, they brought the corpses down to bury them, or men had died in the hospitals. And dying in the hospitals, where are you going to bury them? Nearby. Hundreds of men hundreds, dozens of these graveyards around. They do have their names on there. You know, Jacques or George or whoever their name might be. And over again, died for France. Mort pour la France. That's very sobering. What's even more sobering is the ossuary itself. At the end of the battle, the area here does not go back to a quiet area of the front. There's going to be heavy fighting here. in 1917, through the remainder of 1916, 1917, and 1918. I cannot say that every corpse, therefore, that's found on the battlefield actually took place, was actually laid there, shall we say, during the battle itself. Some were there later on. Well, I was very, very glad when I was on my first brief tour with my taxi driver, because when he drove me to Duomo, I said that wrong, drove me to the ossuary, he said, well, he kind of pointed, look in the windows, what he was telling me. All along the side of this, can I give you a better view of this? Your parking lot's over here. This is not as good. The side here, I believe this is the front, you park over here. The side here has, we can see people walking in and out. You can go inside, you see the film, you go up to the tower. And all along here there are windows. Not just on the front, all the way along here, but mostly on the back. Can I show you a shot of the back? All right, in any event, there are windows. What's in there? What do they want you to see? These are photographs that somebody's taken in the windows. Look what you see. No one knows these are German. No one knows that they're French. There's no identification marks on them. You go from window to window. I don't know how big these, would you call this a crypt? I'm not even sure what you call this. These room after room after room, you look through the windows. And the bones in there are literally up to the ceiling. There's one at the very, very far end, this one or two actually, that aren't completely full. So it looks like to me they're about 10 feet deep, 8 feet wide. How many tens of thousands of human remains do you have here? You take an examination of some of these bones, and this looks like this man's lower jaw was blown off. Very happily, I cannot say that this happened when he was still alive. Maybe with a continuing rifle fire, machine gun fire, and artillery fire. When we see damage to these corpses, there was damage that was inflicted after they had been killed. One skull, all his teeth had been blown out. If he was alive when that happened, I'm sure that was a very unpleasant experience. You go to American battlefields, and you really should. I urge you very, very strongly to go to the historical sites in the United States. We're Americans, we have access to this. If you get to Europe, see their historical sites as well. You go to places like Gettysburg, beautiful place. The Pennsylvania countryside is really, really attractive. Trees, nice rolling countryside. It's really, really pretty. They have the cemetery there where most, like 5,000 of the Union dead were buried. The Confederates really aren't buried there. Their bodies were retrieved after the Civil War, and they were brought down to various cemeteries in the South. So do you get really sense? You go to a graveyard and you do not have a sense of what's underneath the earth, do you? But you go to Verdun. I thought I was prepared when I went to Verdun, but I was not. Oh, I read about it. I knew the area is blown to smithereens, going to be shell holes all over. I expected that. I even heard about the trench of bayonets, and I definitely wanted to see that. But I didn't know about this. I had another experience there. It was awful, awful, awful disturbing. Okay, remember Fort Dumo? I showed you this a couple of times already. Uh, I paid the money, I got the tapes, I went on the tours. I did this. Well, actually, the first time I didn't pay the tape pay for the tape for the tour because I didn't want to keep my taxi driver out there so long. So I kind of ran in, I looked around, I read the markers as well as I could understand them. And then I was walking around on top of it. Can I tell you where I was at? See, this is what it looks like on top. Remember the turrets? Got little trails here you walk around and look at the defenses. I'd like to show you a little bit more, but oh heavens. I was on the outer wall. As you can see, it's heavily forested here. I was out on the outer wall, probably about over here. I'm walking around on top of this. Try to get a feel for it. I didn't know the first time I visited this in 1983 if I'd ever see it again. So I certainly want to take whatever moment I had to put this in my memory. And I got up there, and then the guns went off. What? You see, the French army has an area right here that's totally blown to scrod. Why don't you use it as artillery range? I didn't know that. I wasn't afraid from the standpoint that I actually thought I was going to get hurt. What I saw moved me to a great deal. But the guns, they were using, well, heavy guns. Boom, 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 boom. I didn't expect sound effects. That cut in a little bit deeper than what I'd seen before. Oh my goodness. On my second visit, I had a lot of time because I'm there by myself. So I talked to one of the guys in the museum. I was there either on Monday or Tuesday. He says, yes, on Mondays and Tuesdays, the French shell. I would urge you to go to Verdun. I would urge you to see Verdun. It's hard to read about this. It's better to experience it. But I urge you to go on a Monday or Tuesday because you catch the guns. My memory, of course, this is 1983. My memory of what I felt like in 1983 has faded somewhat. But when I went back by myself about 2014, driving around, the oddest thing happened. Let me make a comparison. Washington, D.C. has the Holocaust Museum. It is one of the most, it's one of the best I've ever seen. There are smaller ones. I've seen one in Boston. I've seen one in New York City. This is the best one I've seen. Really, really quite stunning. And of course, I've taught the Holocaust course a number of times. I've read about the Holocaust a lot, first-person accounts, secondary sources. And I've been through that. I can't tell you how many times I've been through that. One time I was in the Navy, and I managed to get deployed at the Navy Yard for my 2-week training in the summer. My Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. Now, after drill, you have a little time to kill. They closed the museum like 5:30. I was there for 2 weeks every day. I would get as fast as I could, get over to the Holocaust Museum. Of course, they don't want you to come in late because it takes so long to get through. And you have to, at that time, I think you still do, you have to get a slip. So you're supposed to go in at a certain time so you don't all get jammed up. But I came in time and again. They're very nice to me. I said, look, I know you close in an hour. I know you're not supposed to let me in. Can I at least get in the last part? Can I at least get in some of it? I've been through numerous times. It takes about 3.5, 4 hours for me before I either mentally or physically, legs get sore. It's hard for me to handle it anymore. So I've seen it numerous times. One time I was there. I'm taking this in. I want to experience this. But I suddenly found my mind reciting a German phrase. When I was a young man trying to get a good German accent, one of the ways I did that, I tried to copy what people were saying in the German theater. Now, it's probably not the best way to do it because people in the theater talk very fast. Nonetheless, I had Hamlet in German. I didn't try to memorize it, but you listen to it over and over again. After a while, I could recite a few phrases in my mind. I could even recite a little bit of the dialogue going back and forth between Hamlet and other people. And the German phrase stuck in my mind, Zergehen and löst in einen Tau sich auf. Disappear and do. I'm going, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to understand. But why do I have this refrain in my brain? Is there part of my brain doesn't want to face it? I don't know. The second time I was at Verdun, there's something odd happens. I'm listening to the birds. Now remember, when you're near Douaumont, you're going to hear artillery on Mondays and Tuesdays. Both my visits were on either Monday or Tuesday. There's things to hear. And I'm listening to the birds. I swear, this was my opinion, it hasn't changed. I swear the birds were tweeting with a French accent. We go tweet, tweet, the birds over here go tweet, tweet, and the birds over there go tweet, tweet. My ears aren't very good. I have a high range hearing loss. I'm not sure I was hearing this correctly. You know what I read someplace about birds? We like to say, well, the birds wake up in the morning like you do, and they greet the day, and they're happy little birdies. And reading about this, they say, well, what the naturalists actually the birds are doing is they're cutting out their territory. They're not saying, oh, what a wonderful day, let's sing for these humans. They're tweeting to say, this is my branch, this is my tree. You put your beak in my tree, you put a beak on my branch, and I will not be held responsible for what I'm going to do to you. Well, why would I think that? I have also read that birds of different species sometimes don't tweet exactly the same. And birds in Southern California don't tweet the same as Northern California. I will let the naturalists decide on that. This curiosity at this time. Was I doing the same thing as I did on more than one occasion at the Holocaust Museum, which I have seen dozens of times? Was I putting mental distance? Was I allowing my brain to be distracted a little bit from my experience? Go to Gettysburg. Go to the other battlefields. They can be quite stunning. But there's never been anything I have seen anything like this. Okay, 1983. Done teaching at study abroad. Come home. Yeah, I'm a boob. Got some problems. I am not exaggerating. 4 months after I came home, 4 months, I had another burden when I was trying to go to sleep because I couldn't get this out of my mind. Yeah, I cried. I literally cried myself to sleep on more than one occasion. How could I possibly realize what had gone on? But when you see it and you feel it, it does hit you quite hard. The first time I was at the ossuary, my French is questionable at best. There were signs there. When you walk inside and they have the corpses. It's a crypt more or less, and they have, I guess, bodies buried, that people's names on them, bodies buried in the wall. And there's a sign there which read something like this. This is a shrine to the nation of France. You will conduct yourself properly or we're going to throw you out. I don't remember seeing that the second time I went. Maybe I didn't look, didn't see it right. There's a certain level of reverence. And I don't think it's just French, I think it's other nationalities as well. In Europe, they have more reverence for battlefields, the dead in concentration camps than we do. Remember, 1983, I taught on study abroad. I went, one of the places we stopped to was Prague. I was an idiot. I got up in the morning. I'm going to see Prague. Man, it's so cool, wonderful day. So I'm wandering around, got lost. The tour guide found me. So I had a personal tour guide for the remainder of the day till we get back with the bus. We went to a Jewish cemetery. We went to a Jewish museum. Now remember, all the Jews were killed in the Second World War in Prague and in Czechoslovakia. This guy is brilliant, fun guy. I thought I was being completely respectful. But when we were in these places, I tried to talk in a normal speech like I'm talking now, essentially. I didn't think that was disrespectful, but he wouldn't do anything but talk in whispers. On the study abroad, we went to a concentration camp. There's one near Vienna, Austria, called Mauthausen. Thousands of people died there. There is a large gas chamber where people were gassed. Forced labor, these people were forced to quarry stone and carry heavy stones up the hills, and so the quarry is still there. And we drove over there, the students got off and pulled out the Frisbee. There are parks all over Austria. There's parks all over Vienna. You can go on the street. It's kind of dangerous. They don't like you doing that. But why would you go to a concentration camp and pull out a Frisbee? They don't read German, I do, and it says, please be respectful, know where you are. And I try to be forceful without being mean. Please put up your Frisbee. I said, good God, don't you know where you're at? Can we have a certain level of respect? Americans do have a bad reputation. We're we're disrespectful among other things. We don't really know the European culture. Yeah, we jaywalk when you shouldn't. We have our hands in our pockets when we shouldn't. We expect everybody to speak English. We do get a tendency to, and tourists, and that's how Europeans usually see us, tourists. And we do have a tendency to have a bad reputation. But I think just being a little bit more careful, we could come across better than we do. Let me go back to the United States. When I get the opportunity, I like to visit battlefields. When I was going through basic training in the Navy, I was down in New Orleans. They did let us off for the weekend. Ooh. So what am I going to do? Well, how do I get to the site of the Battle of New Orleans? It took a riverboat. Up. So I got on the riverboat, goes down to the side of the battle. Got off, came in. You all familiar with the Battle of New Orleans, the more significant, important battles in American history? Drove the British out so they couldn't control the Mississippi. Gave the United States an opportunity to show that it really did have enough vigor to defend itself. And it's also one of the most lopsided battles in history. The Americans lose, 50 guys killed and wounded? And the British lose like 2,000? See, in 1815, that is a very high casualty figures. So I'm there, and the tour guide, you got the lady there. Nice lady, I thought. And she is going to give us, she works for the Park Service. You see these people wearing the uniforms and the hats. She's working for the Park Service, and she's going to give us an explanation. And she walks up and starts smiling. And she starts talking about, I'm going to give you the American side of this. I was offended. It's not funny. Nothing's funny. I can't remember if I stayed and listened to the rest of her pitch. I don't think I did. I didn't say a word to her. I just walked away. Something else I can do and listen to your jokes. Recently, I fall into a trap of many historians. I've been doing a lot of research on the Little Bighorn. This is a battle that has been so heavily researched. You would think there's nothing else to say. But I got interested and I go, wow, I got things I can say here. things that haven't been emphasized, things that haven't been said before. I even made a case that Custer's battalion, as you know, was wiped out. That one of the men might have survived. And I thought it made a pretty good case for that. Another historian took my lead and my sources, and he expanded it more. And his case is even stronger than mine, that there was somebody who survived. I've done other things. What did the Swiss do there? The guy's born in Switzerland. Big 100-page article. What the Germans did there, talking about the reliability of artifacts. I'm still making contributions here. At least I hope I am. I think I am. It's about 10 and a half hour drive from Utah to the battlefield side in eastern Montana. I've been up there a bunch of times. And there was one time I was up there. And they said, we are going to have an explanation of the battle. They have a nice little visitor center. So you go in there, and they have some artifacts, which is kind of fun. What did the cavalry uniforms look like? And have guys, a mannequin with boots on. And they showed you the battlefield disposition. It's right beneath Last Stand Hill. In fact, you look out the window, and Last Stand Hill is right there. At the Little Bighorn, when they found the bodies, they scratched in the bodies where they initially found them. Later, the bones were taken up on Last Stand Hill and buried in a mass grave up there. They didn't know who was who, but there's a big monument there, list of, a couple hundred names of men who died in that area. They've got this guy, he's going to give us a pitch, man. He taught high school history in Montana. Man, he knows the battle. So I said, I'll hear what he has to say. So I went over there. They had this little group, and he's outside. Over his shoulder, you can see Last Stand Hill. Over 40 men died there. Over his other shoulder, you can see the gorge where apparently the men ran down, were slaughtered as they tried to escape down toward the river. And he's laughing, he's making with the jokes. At the Battle of the Little Bighorn, 265 U.S. troops were killed. We're not exactly sure how many Indians died, but some of the best estimates, I think, are about 40. So you take 265 and 40 of over 300 people who died there, and that's not funny. One of the articles I did was the psychological problems these men had, and I think I mentioned that already. The suicides, the alcoholism, and you're making jokes. I was very offended. Oh, he had some of these facts incorrect as well. I was very offended. I was very offended. I didn't say a word, I just walked away. For a nickel, I would have given that guy a piece of my mind, but I didn't. If everybody there wants to listen to his idiocy, they're free to do so. But I don't have to take it. Let's go back to France. Human suffering is nothing you make light of. At least in France, you're going to conduct yourself properly, or they're going to throw you out. Let's go back to Alistair Horn. Remember I told you about that book I read, well, back in junior high school? I can still remember a lot of information from it. I didn't have so many other things to read. I had to reread it. He speculates. And as you can see from all these lectures, I speculate somewhat as well. Going back to 3/4 of the French army fought at Verdun. Can we say of all the experiences of the First World War, this is the one that more the men of the French army have in common than any other. Therefore, he says, or he speculates, that does the Battle of Verdun help explain the French collapse in May and June of 1940? You all remember, military historians are very well informed. You all know what happened. The Germans attacked, the French army virtually collapsed. They even start shooting their officers. The army falls apart. Like 6 weeks For over 4 years, from 1914 to 1918, the Germans could not defeat France, and France wins the war. In 1940, France is knocked out in 6 weeks. What happened? Well, the men that were junior officers, lieutenants, that kind of thing, during the First World War, by 1940, 20 odd years later, they're senior commanders, they're colonels now. Do they have the guts and the heart to do it again? If you're looking at the enlisted men, the privates and the corporals, in 1916, 24 years later, they're senior sergeants. Officers or administrators, they're very important. But the people actually assigning the work that has to be done, it's actually the sergeants. We can actually say the sergeants are actually the backbone of what's going on. The officers plan, but it's the sergeants that actually direct. And these men had the experience of fighting at Verdun, and they don't want to do it again. Now, one of the weaknesses of this is that even though 3/4 of the French army fights at Verdun, the experience of fighting on the Western Front is something that every one of them experience. Does it have to be at Verdun? Can it be at Champagne? Can it be at the Marne? Can it be at the frontiers? The Second Marne? All these battles. I don't think you can look at French failure in 1914 and blame it on Verdun alone. Maybe you can take a look at this and say perhaps the entire experience of the French army in the First World War led them to have a crisis of being willing to do it again. So look at our time check here. Got a little time left, so let's go on. Now, at exactly the same time that the French are suffering egregiously at Verdun, the British are planning the big push. Remember, we met this guy in 1915, Douglas Haig. He's also known as Sir Douglas Haig. Later on, of course, he was knighted. The British make a big deal over this. Like Paul McCartney, the real genius behind the rock group, the Beatles. If you're referring to him in Britain, you should call him Sir Paul McCartney, because he's been knighted. The British like these kind of things, and that's fine. Call him Sir. So sometimes I call Douglas Haig, and sometimes I call him Sir Douglas Haig. Well, Haig has taken over from John French. And now Haig is trying to make sure that his army is trained. He's got enough guys. By the summer of 1916, the small army in 1914, roughly 100,000 men, is now over 2 million men. And as the British Army had expanded, they are starting to defend or encompass a greater section of the Western Front. Now, his army is well trained. They drill these guys and drill these guys. Hours upon hours, bayonet drill. I'm not going to say that hand-to-hand combat does not take place in the First World War. It clearly does. But with enormous firepower, from machine guns to rifles to artillery, the chance of you getting close enough to actually duke it out hand-to-hand is unlikely. But it does happen. You get trench warfare, get in. And so the Germans, excuse me, the British have their infield rifles. You got the bayonet on that, bayonet drills. They tell the guys how to bayonet each other. You don't bayonet a guy in the chest. The reason for that is there's bone, there's muscle, sinews there. Of course, when the bayonet goes in, of course, the immediate reaction is for your body to tense up. And it can get stuck in the bones. So sometimes bones and sinews. So when you actually have a hard time pulling it out. They're taught that when your bayonet gets stuck in a guy, to pull it out, you put your foot on his body near where the bayonet goes in and pull it out. But it's better to get him in the guts. Pull in, get it out. To teach these men aggressiveness, and that's probably more important than actually teaching them hand-to-hand combat. To teach these men aggressiveness, they have them bayonet over and over against sacks of straw. The British are not nearly as famous for our discipline as are the Germans. But they're trying to make sure these men are highly disciplined. They will follow every order. And the British Army, by the summer of 1916, is very good. But the British Army had expanded so rapidly. Yes, there are units that had been involved in combat. Remember, I talked about the Battle of Loos. Units had been involved in combat. But there are many units now on the Western Front that have not been heavily involved in combat. Can we say, therefore, Douglas Haig's army is well trained, but it's untested? And that's going to be a big factor when we talk about the Battle of the Somme. This is his big push. Haig has the idea. We'll just push him out. We'll figure out how to do this. We'll get artillery. We got our men together. They're well trained. They're vigorous. And we'll just simply smash a hole through the German lines. Go back to the Western Front again. That's Verdun. Okay. Here we are on the Western Front again. Remember I talked earlier when I was talking about Verdun. You have this salient, this bulge in the line, which is most convenient for the Germans to attack into it. The reverse is true from the French and the British standpoint, because the bulge goes out in this direction. So Haig wants to look at the broadest place right here along the Somme River. Can I show you where the Somme River is in France? Okay. Yeah. Actually, what happens here is they're not fighting on the Somme. They're fighting near the Somme. That's why they named the battle after the Somme. Now, Haig likes to over-prepare. While the French have a very good army, but the French don't have the luxuries of waiting until they fight. They fight ferociously starting in 1914. But finally, by the summer, actually by June of 1916, the French say, look, you've got to come in. You've got to put pressure on the Germans. You've got to hit them. So they're going to have to withdraw their units that are torching us at Verdun someplace else. If you don't do this, there's a pretty good chance that we might even collapse down here. Now, that's a little bit of exaggeration. On the other hand, the main idea, of course, Haig wants to wait a while, but you want to relieve the pressure on Verdun. It's a good idea about here we got the bulge in the line I was talking about. I'd like to get a map that shows you a little bit more closely what's going on. And that's not jumping out in front of me. So I'll let it go at least for a few minutes. The idea here is to bust through. It's not totally a British operation. The British are going to be up here. The French are going to be there on their side, essentially. And you're going to bust through here. Okay. You go deep in, at least initially, you will still control the flanks on either side. And in doing so, you are going to be able to not run away from your support. Now, the whole idea is to use cavalry. We'll figure out how to break through. Am I being misleading about this? Okay. The whole idea is that we'll break through. the British will break through. And we will be able to get through the lines, and now we can maneuver. We'll send our cavalry out. There's divisions of cavalry, men on horseback. Horses are not well used. They're used in transportation. And I've gone over. I'm very sorry about that. Please accept my apology. Let me talk about the breakthrough in a few minutes. Shall I say next time? In the meantime, enjoy whatever you're doing. And the birds are singing, I think, around here in English. We'll talk to you later.